The moment I stood in front of my entire family at the backyard reunion and said the words, "I'm gay," the silence that followed hit harder than any slap I had ever imagined. I expected shouting or tears, or maybe even my father's disappointed stare. But what I didn't expect was the text that buzzed on my phone 30 minutes later from Gabriel Ruiz, the man who had once sworn he would love me forever in secret. The photo showed him smiling in a crisp navy suit beside my identical twin brother Connor, both of them holding hands under a banner that read "Engaged." My stomach dropped as I realized the caption. Couldn't wait another day to make it official. "Love you forever, Connor Thompson." I stared at the screen until the pixels blurred. Seth Thompson, graphic designer for New York City, back in Denver for exactly one weekend to finally be honest with the people who raised me. And this was the universe's reply. Gabriel and I had ended things 3 years earlier in college when I wanted to stop hiding and he wanted to keep his teaching job and his conservative family's approval. We had promised no contact, no drama. Yet here he was, marrying the one person on earth who looked exactly like me. Connor and I shared the same sharp jawline, same dark hair that curled at the ends when it was humid, same hazel eyes that turned green in sunlight. The only difference anyone ever noticed was the small scar above my left eyebrow from a childhood bike accident. In that photo, the scar was missing on the man standing beside Gabriel. My mother's voice pulled me back. "Seth, honey, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." She had no idea how right she was. I slipped the phone into my pocket and forced a smile that felt like broken glass. "Yeah, Mom. Just processing." The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of forced congratulations and sideways glances from aunts who had always suspected I was different. By the time the sun dipped behind the Rockies, I was in my rental car, speeding toward the city, heart hammering so loud I could barely hear the radio. I pulled into the parking lot of the old coffee shop where Gabriel and I used to meet in secret during sophomore year. The place hadn't changed. Same chipped wooden tables, same barista who never asked questions. I ordered a black coffee I wouldn't drink and sat by the window replaying every conversation we had ever had. Gabriel had been my first everything. Patient, funny, terrified of being found out. He would trace the scar on my forehead and whisper that it made me uniquely mine. Now he was choosing the version of me that had never asked him to come out. The betrayal burned hotter than the coffee. My phone lit up again. A message from Connor this time. "Bro, we need to talk. Dinner tomorrow? Gabriel wants to explain." I typed back 3 different angry replies and deleted them all. Instead, I drove to the Airbnb I had booked for the week and collapsed onto the couch. Sleep didn't come. I kept seeing their faces side by side, mirror images of the life I thought I had left behind. By morning, I knew I couldn't run back to New York without answers. I had come home to claim my truth. Now that truth was staring back at me, wearing my brother's face and my ex's ring. The next afternoon, I met them at a quiet Italian place downtown. Connor stood when I walked in, looking exactly like the reflection I shaved in front of every morning. Gabriel stayed seated, eyes fixed on the breadbasket, as if it held all the secrets of the universe. "Seth," Connor started, voice steady but gentle. "We didn't plan for it to happen like this." I sat down slowly, every muscle tight. "You didn't plan to propose the same week I finally told the family I'm gay?" The words tasted like acid. Gabriel finally looked up. Those familiar brown eyes that once made me feel safe now looked exhausted. "I saw your post on Instagram. The one where you wrote, 'Today, I stop hiding.' I was proud of you, Seth. Really. But Connor and I, we've been together almost a year. It just felt right. A year." The number landed like a punch. While I was building a life in New York, pretending the hole in my chest was just homesickness, my twin had been falling in love with the man who had once held me through every panic attack about coming out. The waiter arrived with menus, but I couldn't read a single word. All I could see was the way Gabriel's hand rested on Connor's knee under the table, the same gentle touch he used to save for me alone. I listened as they explained. They met at a teacher conference. Connor had moved back to Denver after finishing his MBA and started volunteering at the same youth center where Gabriel coached soccer. They bonded over shared jokes, then shared silences, then something deeper. Connor admitted he had always known he was gay too, but watched me struggle so much that he stayed in the closet longer. I didn't want to steal your moment, he said quietly. But when Gabriel and I connected, it felt like the universe was giving us both a second chance. Second chance. The phrase echoed in my skull as I drove home that night. I'd spent years convincing myself Gabriel was my past. Now the past was marrying my present in the most literal way possible. The next morning, I woke to a text from my best friend Mia in New York. Call me. I saw the photo. What the hell is happening? I didn't call. Instead, I laced up my running shoes and hit the trails behind the house where Connor and I grew up. The same trails where we used to race each other as kids, finishing in a dead heat every single time. Halfway up the ridge, my phone rang. It was Dad. Son, your mother and I are still processing. But we love you. Both of you. Both of you. The words cracked something open inside me. For the first time, I realized the coming out moment wasn't just about me. It was about Connor, too. He had been carrying his own secret while protecting mine. The anger I had been cradling like a shield started to feel heavier than necessary. By the time I reached the summit, the sun was high and the city sprawled below like a promise. I sat on a rock and let the wind dry the sweat on my face. Gabriel had chosen Connor. Connor had chosen Gabriel. And I had chosen honesty. Maybe that was enough for today. The descent was easier, legs burning, but heart strangely lighter. I didn't know how I would survive the wedding in 6 weeks, but I knew I had to try. For the first time since the announcement, I felt something besides rage. I felt the faint, terrifying spark of possibility. The following week blurred into a series of careful conversations and avoided eye contact. Connor asked me to be his best man. I said yes before my brain could catch up to my mouth. Gabriel stayed quiet during the planning meetings, but every time our eyes met across the kitchen table, I felt the old pull, the one that once made me believe love could conquer fear. My mother threw herself into wedding details like it was the only way to keep the family from splintering. 2 of my boys getting married, she kept saying with a nervous laugh, as if repeating it would make the situation normal. Dad mostly stayed in the garage working on his classic truck, the way he always did when emotions got too loud. I threw myself into work from my laptop, designing logos for a new client in Brooklyn, but my mind kept drifting. I started meeting Mia for video calls at odd hours. "You look like you haven't slept in days," she said one night, her face pixelated on my screen. "Seth, you don't have to do this. You can come home early. No one would blame you." But I couldn't leave. Running away had been Gabriel's specialty, not mine. I needed to see this through. One Thursday evening, Connor and I ended up alone in the garage helping Dad change the oil. The familiar smell of grease and old metal felt grounding. Connor wiped his hands on a rag and looked at me sideways. "I know this is weird for you. If you want to punch me, I'll let you." I laughed despite myself. Tempting, but I think we've hurt each other enough without adding bruises. We talked for an hour about everything we had never said. How he had watched me come out to our high school friends and envied my courage. How he had started dating Gabriel as a friend first, never intending for it to become more. "He still talks about you sometimes," Connor admitted quietly. Not in a way that makes me jealous. More like regret mixed with pride. The words lodged in my throat. Regret. Pride. 2 emotions I understood too well. That night, I drove to Gabriel's apartment unannounced. He opened the door in sweatpants and an old college hoodie, the one I used to steal. "Seth," he breathed, stepping aside to let me in. The place smelled like his cologne and fresh coffee, exactly the way I remembered. We sat on opposite ends of the couch like polite strangers. "I didn't come here to ruin anything," I said finally. "I just need to understand why I am. Why my brother?" Gabriel ran a hand through his hair, the same nervous gesture from college. "Because he's you without the fear. He's you without the nights you spent crying because you thought your parents would disown you. He's steady in a way I needed after you left." The honesty stung, but it also felt like air after being underwater. "And you're still you," he added softly. "The version I fell in love with first." We didn't kiss. We didn't even touch. But something shifted in that small living room. I left with the realization that love wasn't a limited resource. Gabriel could love Connor and still carry pieces of what we had been. The question was whether I could live with those pieces scattered around my life like confetti after a parade. The next morning, I met my old college roommate, Tyler, for breakfast. Tyler had come out years before me, and now ran a successful LGBTQ youth center downtown. "You're in the thick of it," he said over eggs and toast. "The mirror stage of grief. Your twin is literally holding up a reflection of the relationship you lost. It's psychological torture." He wasn't wrong, but he also gave me the number of a therapist who specialized in family and identity issues. I made the appointment before I could talk myself out of it. Sessions with Dr. Elena Ramirez started slow. She asked gentle questions about what home meant to me now that the two people I loved most were building one together. I talked about the scar above my eyebrow and how it had always been the only thing that made me feel singular. She smiled and said, "Maybe it's time to stop needing a scar to prove you're different." The word stayed with me during long runs and late-night sketches. Meanwhile, the wedding planning accelerated. Gabriel's mother insisted on a big Catholic ceremony, even though neither groom was particularly religious. My mother countered with neutral flowers and a venue that didn't scream tradition. I watched the two families circle each other like cautious animals and wondered if any of us would survive the reception without someone saying something they couldn't take back. One Saturday, Connor dragged me to the tuxedo fitting. Gabriel was already there, standing on a platform while a tailor pinned the hem. Seeing him in the charcoal suit that matched the one waiting for Connor felt like stepping into a dream I hadn't ordered. Connor stood beside me, shoulder to shoulder, and for a moment the mirror in front of us showed three versions of the same face. The tailor blinked twice. "Twins?" he asked. We both nodded. Gabriel's eyes met mine in the reflection and held. In that moment, I understood the real complication wasn't jealousy. It was the terrifying possibility that I might still be in love with the version of myself Gabriel had chosen. After the fitting, we grabbed beers at a dive bar nearby. Connor left early for a work call, leaving Gabriel and me alone again. "You're doing okay?" he asked, peeling the label off his bottle. "Better than expected," I lied. Then the truth slipped out. "I'm scared the wedding will feel like watching my own funeral." Gabriel reached across the table and squeezed my wrist once, quick and familiar. "Then let's make sure it feels like a beginning instead." The touch lingered on my skin long after he pulled away. That night, I sketched for the first time in weeks. Not logos, not client work, just lines and shadows that slowly formed two figures standing under an arch of flowers, faces turned toward each other, but not quite touching. I didn't know what the drawing meant yet, but it felt like the first honest thing I had created since coming home. The first real crack in the careful piece appeared at the joint bachelor party. Connor had wanted something low-key, just 20 guys at a cabin in the mountains. Gabriel's friends brought tequila and a playlist heavy on early 2000s pop. I showed up determined to be the supportive brother, but 2 hours and someone started a game of Never Have I Ever. The shots flowed and the confessions got louder. When the bottle pointed at me, I heard myself say, "Never have I ever been in love with my brother's fiancée." The room went quiet. Gabriel's face drained of color. Connor stared at me like I had grown a second head. I laughed it off as a joke, but the damage was done. Later on the back porch, Gabriel found me nursing a beer. "Was that necessary?" His voice was low, hurt. I shrugged, the alcohol loosening my tongue. "It's true. Doesn't mean I'm going to do anything about it." He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the pine from the trees and the faint trace of his cologne. "You think I don't feel it too? Every time I look at Connor, I see pieces of you. But he's not you, Seth. He's better for me because he never asked me to be someone I wasn't ready to be." The words should have stung. Instead, they felt like permission to finally breathe. We didn't fight. We sat on the steps until the stars came out and talked about the things we had never said out loud. How scared he had been when I first told him I loved him. How I had waited every night for him to change his mind and choose me publicly. When Connor joined us later, he didn't ask what we had discussed. He just handed us both fresh beers and sat between us like a bridge. In that moment, the three of us felt less like rivals and more like survivors of the same storm. The next morning, my phone rang with a New York area code. My boss offered me a promotion if I came back early. Bigger salary, bigger projects, the chance to forget Denver existed. I almost said yes. Then I looked across the kitchen where Connor was making pancakes wearing Gabriel's old college shirt and something inside me shifted. Running had been Gabriel's move. I was done running. I turned down the promotion and booked a longer stay. Dr. Ramirez's next session focused on mirrors, literal and figurative. She asked me to describe what I saw when I looked at Connor now. Safety, I said, and envy, and love so big it scares me. She nodded like that made perfect sense. The work is learning that your reflection doesn't diminish you. It multiplies the possibilities for happiness. I left the office lighter than I had felt in months. Family dinner that Sunday tested every new boundary I was building. Dad asked Gabriel about his plans for the future. Mom asked me if I was dating anyone in New York. The questions felt like landmines. Connor squeezed my knee under the table in silent support. Gabriel answered for both of us with easy grace, talking about adopting kids someday and building a home with room for everyone. When he said everyone, his eyes flicked to me. I realized he wasn't just talking about Connor. He was talking about the whole messy family we had somehow become. After dessert, I helped Gabriel wash dishes. Our hands brushed in the soapy water, and neither of us pulled away immediately. "Thank you for staying," he said quietly. "For all of us." I dried the last plate and set it down. "I'm not staying for you, Gabriel. I'm staying for me." The words felt true in a way nothing had for weeks. The following weekend, the three of us drove to the venue to do a walkthrough. The garden was exactly as described in the brochure. Rows of white roses, a wooden arch draped in greenery, mountains in the distance. Connor and Gabriel practiced their first dance while I watched from the sidelines. Their movements were easy, practiced, but when the music ended, Gabriel looked over at me and smiled the small private smile that used to be mine alone. I smiled back without hesitation. The jealousy that had lived in my chest for so long felt smaller, like a shadow instead of a monster. That night, I went for a run under a full moon. My feet hit the pavement in rhythm with my heartbeat. I thought about the boy I had been in college, terrified and hopeful. I thought about the man I was becoming, scarred but steady. When I got back to the Airbnb, I opened my sketchbook and added color to the drawing I had started weeks earlier. 2 figures under an arch, but now a third stood slightly behind them, not in shadow, but in light. The image didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like family. Tension returned like an unexpected storm 2 weeks before the wedding. Gabriel's parents arrived from Albuquerque and immediately filled every room with questions about tradition and faith. His mother cornered me in the hallway one afternoon. "You're the twin," she said, studying my face. The one who announced everything. The pause told me exactly what she thought of my announcement. I kept my voice even. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Seth." She nodded once and walked away, but the look she gave Gabriel later spoke volumes. That evening, Connor found me on the back porch. "She'll come around," he said. I shrugged. Maybe, or maybe some people never do. We sat in silence until Gabriel joined us carrying 3 glasses of iced tea. I told her I'm not choosing between my family and my future, he said simply. She'll either accept both or she won't. The quiet strength in his voice reminded me why I had fallen for him in the first place. Not because he was perfect, but because he was trying. The next day brought another complication. My old high school girlfriend, Emily, showed up at the house with her new fiancé, clearly invited by my mother in a misguided attempt at normalcy. Emily hugged me too long and whispered, "I always knew, you know. I just hoped you'd choose me anyway." The words landed softly, without malice. Later, Gabriel pulled me aside. "You okay?" I nodded. Surprisingly, yes. Turns out closure comes in weird packages. He laughed, and the sound felt like forgiveness we both needed. Work deadlines piled up, but I found myself sketching more than designing. New images kept appearing, hands reaching across divides, faces that were the same, yet different, light breaking through clouds. I started posting a few anonymously on Instagram. The comments poured in from strangers who recognized pieces of their own stories. One message stood out. "Your art helped me tell my parents yesterday." "Thank you." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying with a simple heart. Something inside me clicked into place. My pain was becoming purpose. The bachelor party redo happened quietly at Tyler's youth center. No alcohol, just pizza and video games and stories from guys who had walked similar paths. Connor dominated the basketball court, while Gabriel and I sat on the sidelines watching. "He's good for you," I said finally. Gabriel nodded. "So are you." In a different way. The honesty didn't hurt anymore. It felt like growth. 2 nights before the rehearsal dinner, I couldn't sleep. I drove to the park where Gabriel and I had shared our first kiss years earlier. The bench was still there, weathered but solid. I sat and let the memories wash over me without fighting them. When headlights cut through the darkness, I wasn't surprised to see Connor's truck pull up. He got out and sat beside me without a word. We watched the city lights together until the sky began to lighten. "I love him," Connor said at last. "But I love you more. You're my brother first." I swallowed hard. "I love you both too. Differently. But it's enough." The rehearsal dinner arrived in a whirlwind of flowers and nerves. Gabriel's mother gave a stiff toast. My father surprised everyone by raising his glass to the courage it takes to love honestly. Tears pricked my eyes. Later, Gabriel found me on the dance floor during the practice slow dance. "One dance with the best man?" he asked. I stepped into his arms, and for 3 minutes the world narrowed to the familiar rhythm of his heartbeat against mine. Connor watched from the side with a small smile. No jealousy, just understanding. When the music ended, Gabriel pressed something into my palm. A small silver keychain with 2 interlocking circles. "For the new chapter," he whispered. "Whatever it looks like." I closed my fingers around it and felt the last piece of resistance inside me dissolve. The next morning, I woke up knowing I would stand beside my brother and my first love as they promised forever to each other. And somehow, impossibly, I was at peace with that. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and impossibly clear. I stood in front of the mirror adjusting my charcoal vest and saw the man I had become reflected back. The scar above my eyebrow caught the light, a small silver line that no longer felt like a flaw. Connor stepped up beside me in his matching suit. For once, the identical reflection didn't sting. It felt like solidarity. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. "Ready." Guests filled the garden seats as string music floated on the breeze. I took my place at the front beside Tyler, who had agreed to officiate. Gabriel walked down the aisle first, eyes locked on Connor with a certainty that made my chest ache in the best way. Then Connor followed, and I watched my brother's face transform with joy I had never seen on him before. When they stood together under the arch, the world seemed to hold its breath. The ceremony was simple and beautiful, vows spoken with trembling voices and steady hearts. Rings exchanged, a kiss that felt like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. I handed Connor the ring with steady hands and stepped back into my place. No one in the audience knew the full story behind my calm smile. They didn't need to. At the reception, the dance floor came alive. I danced with my mother, then with Mia, who had flown in as a surprise. Gabriel found me during a slow song and pulled me onto the floor without asking. "Thank you," he said against my ear, "for everything." I rested my forehead against his for one heartbeat. "Thank you for letting me go." The words were true. Letting go had given me back myself. Later, Connor and I stood at the edge of the garden watching fireworks. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think loving the same person would break us." I laughed softly. Turns out it made us stronger. We clinked our glasses and watched the sky explode in color. Gabriel joined us a moment later, sliding an arm around Connor's waist and offering me a genuine smile. The 3 of us stood together under the same stars that had once witnessed our secrets. The night stretched on with laughter and stories. I danced with Gabriel's mother, who finally softened enough to say, "You're a good man, Seth. Both my sons are lucky to have you." The words landed like healing balm. When the last guest left, I helped stack chairs and pack centerpieces. Exhaustion felt sweet rather than heavy. Back at the Airbnb, I opened my sketchbook one final time. I added the last details to the drawing. 3 figures under the arch, faces turned toward a shared horizon, light glowing around all of them equally. I signed it simply for the family we chose and set it aside. Tomorrow I would fly back to New York, but this time the city didn't feel like escape. It felt like home, waiting to welcome the new version of me. The plane lifted off the Denver runway at sunrise. I watched the mountains shrink below and felt something settle deep in my bones. The past 6 weeks had rewritten every definition I thought I knew about love and identity. I had come home broken open and was leaving whole. My phone buzzed with a text from Connor, a photo of him and Gabriel on their honeymoon balcony, both smiling at the camera with matching rings glinting in the light. Beneath it, he had written, "Thank you for standing with us. Love you, brother." I replied with a single heart emoji and closed my eyes. Back in New York, the city welcomed me with familiar chaos. My promotion was still waiting, but I negotiated a hybrid schedule so I could visit Denver more often. The first week home, I framed the finished sketch and hung it above my desk. Every morning, it reminded me that mirrors don't have to compete. They can reflect light in new directions. Mia dragged me to a gallery opening where my anonymous sketches had been discovered by a curator. "You're the mystery artist everyone's talking about," she whispered as people studied the pieces. One buyer asked if the three figures represented brothers. I smiled and said something like that. The sale funded my first solo show scheduled for the fall. Life, it turned out, had more plot twists than I had ever imagined. Months later, I flew back for Christmas. The house smelled like pine and cinnamon. Connor and Gabriel greeted me at the door with matching ugly sweaters. We spent the evening around the tree, exchanging gifts and stories. Dad told terrible jokes. Mom cried happy tears when I announced my gallery opening. Gabriel pulled me aside later and handed me a small wrapped box. Inside was the silver keychain from the rehearsal dinner, now engraved with 3 interlocking circles. "For whenever you need a place to land," he said. I hugged him tight. No hesitation, no old ache. Just gratitude. On Christmas morning, Connor and I took our traditional run through the snow-dusted trails. We matched strides the way we always had, breath clouding in the cold air. At the ridge, we stopped and looked out over the city where our story had begun and changed and continued. "True or false?" I said suddenly, echoing a game we used to play as kids. Connor raised an eyebrow. I smiled. "True or false? Sometimes the person who breaks your heart is the one who teaches you how to love better." He thought for a moment, snowflakes catching in his hair. "True," he said finally. 100% true." We laughed and started the run back down, side by side, 2 identical men with completely different futures stretching bright ahead of us. The wind carried our voices across the valley, full of promise and peace. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need to wonder which version of me was the real one. They were all mine.